Emma Carter boarded the plane with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done it countless times before. She moved lightly, her duffel bag resting on one shoulder, her steps measured, purposeful, unhurried. The early morning terminal still smelled faintly of burnt coffee and disinfectant, the kind of stale air that clung to airports after a long night of layovers. Most passengers were already seated, buckled in, or arranging their belongings overhead. Emma slipped into the narrow aisle, eyes scanning for her seat. 22C. It was a middle seat, of course. She always seemed to get middle seats. She didn't complain. Veterans like her had been trained to take what was given, no matter how uncomfortable. Yet when she reached the row and saw the faces waiting, Emma felt that familiar twinge of dread. On the aisle sat a man in a navy suit, polished shoes tapping impatiently against the floor. His phone was still in his hand, even though the pre-boarding announcement had warned everyone to power down devices. His expression, when Emma gestured politely and said, "Excuse me," was one of mild annoyance, as though she were already inconveniencing him. He shifted just enough to let her pass, muttering something under his breath. Emma didn't ask. What? She slid into 22C, tucking her duffel carefully under the seat in front of her. On the window sat a college-aged woman with earbuds jammed in her ears, head turned away. She glanced at Emma briefly, then went back to scrolling on her phone. The businessman on the aisle gave her a quick, dismissive look before sighing loudly and returning to his messages. Emma clasped her hands together, resting them on her lap. She was used to that look, the one that assessed, judged, dismissed in under 5 seconds. It was the jacket that did it most of the time, a weathered military flight jacket, olive green, patches stitched across the sleeves. The leather was creased from years of wear. The name tag, though faded, still read Carter, E to the people she sat beside, though it wasn't a badge of honor. It was just something odd, out of place. A relic on a woman who looked tired. Emma had grown accustomed to the whispers, though they still stung. 6 combat tours, thousands of hours in the cockpit, dozens of missions flown under impossible circumstances. None of it mattered here, in seat 22C. Here, she was just another weary traveler with scuffed boots and a discounted ticket. The businessman finally spoke, turning slightly toward her. Military discount ticket? His tone was sharp, not curious. He smirked when Emma didn't answer. Figures. Taxpayers footing the bill again. Emma's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes forward, staring at the laminated safety card on the seat back pocket. Years of training had taught her composure. She could sit motionless in a cockpit for hours under missile lock, waiting for the exact moment to break. She could certainly handle a condescending man in 22B. The flight attendant came by with a forced smile, asking if anyone needed assistance. Emma requested water. The smile faltered. After takeoff, the attendant said, moving quickly past. The businessman leaned back, chuckling quietly, as though the rejection validated something. In his mind, Emma said nothing. She never did. She wasn't here to argue or prove anything. She was just trying to get home. But the weight of it pressed on her. Sitting there, squeezed between a businessman tapping impatiently at his phone and a student. Lost in music, Emma felt invisible. Once, her call sign had carried weight in briefing rooms filled with brass. Once, her voice had cut through static-filled radios, commanding squadrons across hostile skies. Once, her decisions had determined whether soldiers on the ground lived or died. Now, she was ignored, belittled, dismissed. Her gaze drifted to the window. The morning light was beginning to stretch across the tarmac, illuminating the ground. Crew moving methodically below. She watched them signal, refuel, and guide the plane. It reminded her of her own team, back when she had a crew of maintainers who knew every bolt and rivet of her jet. People who respected her. People who knew what she could do. The intercom crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are cleared for takeoff. Please fasten your seat belts and ensure all electronics are powered down." The businessman groaned, reluctantly tucking his phone into his pocket. "Ridiculous," he muttered. Emma ignored him. As the engines roared to life, Emma felt the vibration beneath her feet, a familiar hum of power she had known since she was 21 years old. She had always loved the moment any machine came alive. In the cockpit, it had been exhilarating. Here, in 22C, it was just routine. But her body remembered. Her pulse quickened slightly. The plane began its slow taxi. Emma closed her eyes briefly, remembering her first solo takeoff in an F-16. The way the runway blurred as the jet surged forward, afterburners igniting. The way the horizon tilted upward, the world dropping away beneath her. It had been terrifying and glorious all at once. She had been Valkyrie then, her call sign whispered with respect. Now, she was Emma Carter, middle-aged veteran, wedged between strangers who thought little of her. The businessman muttered again. "Figures they'd seat me next to someone who looks like trouble." Emma opened her eyes. She didn't respond. But something inside her shifted. A spark. She had swallowed insults before, endured the sideways glances, accepted the invisibility. But the man's words lingered like smoke. Trouble, he'd called her. He had no idea. The plane accelerated. Down the runway, lifting into the sky. Emma pressed back against her seat as the cabin tilted, clouds swallowing the view outside. She steadied her breathing, letting the rhythm of ascent calm her. But deep inside, she knew this flight would be different. Her instincts told her so. Something waited beyond the clouds. Something that would remind everyone on board, especially those who had judged her, that Emma Carter was far more than just another face in 22C. Asterisk, the hum of the engines deepened as the jet climbed, slicing through thick morning clouds. Emma Carter sat motionless in 22C, her hands folded neatly on her lap, her eyes fixed on the patterned seat back in front of her. To anyone glancing her way, she was just another passenger. But inside, her thoughts pressed and twisted like storm currents. The businessman in 22B broke the silence first. He leaned slightly toward her, his voice pitched just low enough so the flight attendant wouldn't hear. "Military discount ticket, right?" His tone dripped with derision, as though the phrase itself were an insult. Emma didn't respond. She had learned long ago that silence was often more powerful than argument. Still, her jaw flexed, the muscle tightening. The man smirked at her quiet. "Yeah, figured. Bet taxpayers picked up your ticket. Must be nice." He sat back, shaking. His head, clearly pleased with himself. His polished shoes tapped a rhythm against the floor, as if even that small sound could announce his superiority. On the window side, the college student shifted slightly, removing one earbud. She glanced at Emma, curiosity flickering across her face, before quickly turning back to her phone. Emma caught the look. It wasn't malicious, not like the man's words. It was confusion, maybe discomfort. But it still made Emma feel like a specimen under glass. She inhaled slowly through her nose, exhaled through her mouth, letting the oxygen steady her. 6 deployments had drilled that rhythm into her body, the slow, deliberate control of breathing to calm the mind. It worked in cockpits. It worked in combat. It worked even here, pressed between strangers who knew nothing of her life. The seatbelt sign chimed off, freeing passengers to shift, stretch, or line up for the lavatories. Conversations rose around the cabin families planning trips, businessmen discussing deals, children giggling at cartoons playing on seatback screens. To Emma, It all felt faintly unreal, as though she were surrounded by an ocean of lives that had never brushed against the kind of violence she had faced daily. The businessman leaned closer again. So, what was it? Desk job? Filing reports? Or did you just wear the jacket to look the part? Emma turned her head slightly, locking eyes with him for the first time. Her gaze was steady, unblinking, sharp. He faltered for just a second, then chuckled nervously, mistaking her silence for weakness. You know, he continued, my tax dollars actually do real work. Build companies. Create jobs. I don't get applause for it, but hey, enjoy your free ride. Emma felt the words pierce deeper than she wanted to admit. Not because they were true, far from it, but because they echoed the kind of ignorance she had encountered too many times since returning home. People saw the uniform, the jacket, the patches, but rarely the sacrifices. They didn't see the sleepless nights, the bodies of friends lost, the burden of choices made thousands of feet in the air, where hesitation meant death. She turned away from him, toward the window, letting his words dissolve into the drone of the engines. Outside, clouds billowed like mountains, their peaks glowing in sunlight. She focused on them instead. The flight attendant returned with the beverage cart, smiling mechanically at each row. When Emma requested water again, the attendant's smile flickered hesitation, just for a second, before placing the small plastic cup on her tray. Emma nodded her thanks. The businessman smirked at the exchange, as though her needing water somehow confirmed his low opinion. Emma lifted the cup, sipping slowly. Hydration, breathing, composure, all small disciplines she clung to, the kind that kept her centered when surrounded by people who couldn't begin to imagine what she carried. But beneath her calm exterior, a low burn simmered. She remembered the first time she'd been dismissed after hanging up her flight suit for the last time. She had gone to a job interview in civilian clothes, resume packed with skills most corporations couldn't even comprehend. The interviewer skimmed her record flight hours, mission command, leadership under pressure, and said, "So, you don't really have business experience." It had felt the same as this moment, sitting in 22C, being seen yet unseen. The businessman leaned back, stretching his arms across the shared armrest. Figures, he muttered again, not even looking at her this time. Always somebody looking for a handout. Emma closed her eyes. For a flicker of a moment, she imagined answering him, not with words, but with truth. She imagined telling him about the night her squadron had flown into hostile skies, intercepting threats before they could target a convoy carrying U.S. troops. She imagined explaining how her call sign, Valkyrie, had been spoken with reverence. Over radios, how her decisions had saved lives he would never know existed. She imagined watching his smug face crumble when he realized the woman in 22C wasn't a burden, but someone who had shouldered the weight of freedom he so casually enjoyed. But Emma didn't speak. She never did. Instead, she sat still, letting the whispers of humiliation wash over her. Her silence was armor. Her restraint was discipline. Her calm was strength. And yet, something in her gut told her this flight wouldn't allow her to remain invisible much longer. As the plane leveled off, the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but clipped. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some traffic adjustments in controlled airspace. Please keep your seat belts fastened for now. Passengers hardly reacted. A few grumbled about delays. The businessman rolled his eyes. But Emma Carter straightened in her seat, her pilot's instincts tingling. She recognized that tone. It wasn't turbulence the captain was worried about. The plane shook violently, rattling the cabin as though a giant hand had grabbed it mid-flight. Overhead bins clattered. Passengers gasped, and some cried out in fear. Emma Carter pressed her hands against the armrests, letting her knuckles whiten, but her expression remained calm like a predator assessing movement before striking. This wasn't ordinary turbulence. Her instincts, honed over years in the cockpit, screamed at her. Something is wrong. She had felt this before in the skies, when danger lurked invisibly, when every second mattered. The businessman beside her gripped the armrest, his earlier arrogance evaporating into panic. Is this normal? He stammered. His voice cracked, betraying a fear he hadn't felt in his carefully controlled life. Emma glanced at him briefly, her eyes steady and unreadable, then returned to the window. Through the thick layer of clouds, a faint silhouette appeared. Her chest tightened. A fighter jet. Not one, but two, converging in formation. She recognized the design instantly, the unmistakable delta wings, the sleek fuselage, the authority of military precision. Air Force One. Her stomach tightened, heart thundering. The president's aircraft didn't enter ordinary airspace unannounced. Only special circumstances, critical missions, high-level threats called for such maneuvers. And the fact that these jets were escorting her commercial plane suggested something extraordinary. Someone was seeking her. Passengers murmured around her. Children clutched parents' arms. The businessman's face had turned pale. "What is going on?" he asked, voice trembling. Emma didn't answer. "Not yet," the intercom crackled. Static buzzed through the cabin. Most passengers couldn't make out the words, hearing only garbled noise. But Emma's ears, trained to pick out coded transmissions, caught each syllable, each cadence, each subtle inflection. Valkyrie confirmed aboard civilian transport, requesting acknowledgement. The words sliced through her mind like a knife. Valkyrie, her call sign. Her life as a fighter pilot, the missions no one talked about, the operations that saved lives far from public view. They were summoning her now. Her pulse quickened, but her hands remained steady on the armrests. She felt a strange combination of fear and clarity. Fear because this recognition, while honorable, was unprecedented. Clarity because she knew exactly what it meant. Someone at the highest level needed her, and her life as an ordinary passenger had just ended. The businessman leaned closer, now shaking, whispering, Do you understand what they just said?" Emma glanced at him, eyes cold and precise. "Yes," she said quietly. She didn't elaborate. There was no need. Words would cheapen the gravity of the moment. He nodded dumbly, unable to comprehend the weight of her life, condensed into a single call sign. Outside the window, the fighter jets adjusted their formation, flanking the commercial plane with a precision that made Emma's stomach tighten. She knew every maneuver, every angle, every calculated risk. These were professionals. The escort wasn't just protocol, it was extraordinary. The cabin was tense. Passengers whispered nervously. No one realized why the escort existed, and even fewer understood the significance of the name floating invisibly in the radio waves. Valkyrie. She remembered her first mission using that call sign. They had flown into hostile territory, radar sweeping for threats that could strike in seconds. Her squadron had depended on her judgment. One wrong decision would have meant disaster. Lives depended on her precision, on her call. And they had survived, not by luck, but because Valkyrie never panicked. Now, years later, the echoes of that life were calling her back not to the skies of war, but to an escort that nobody could explain. The pilot's voice came again over the intercom, calm, but with an edge Emma recognized immediately. "Attention passengers. We are being escorted through restricted airspace. Please remain seated and remain calm." Gasps rippled across the cabin. The businessman whispered to a woman behind him, "What? Restricted airspace? Are we in danger?" Emma didn't look at them. She didn't flinch. Instead, she studied the escort outside. She could see the pattern forming an unmistakable protective envelope around the aircraft. Every jet, every angle, every position was deliberate. It was the same discipline she had instilled in her squadron, and it was aimed at her. The flight attendant paused in the aisle, pale, hesitant. She leaned toward Emma, voice barely audible. "Ma'am, the cockpit, they're requesting your acknowledgement." Emma's stomach tightened further. She inhaled deeply, feeling the rhythm of her training returning. Years of combat, of high-stakes maneuvers, of decisions that could mean life or death, everything came back in an instant. Her voice had weight. Her presence had authority. Her acknowledgement was enough. She nodded once, barely moving her lips. "Valkyrie acknowledges." A silence fell over the cabin. Even the businessman froze, trying to process the words and the confidence behind them. Outside, the fighter jets dipped their wings in a signal Emma instinctively understood as respect. A nod from professionals who knew exactly who she was. She felt a strange mix of vindication and disbelief. The humiliation of the past hour, the whispers, the condescension, the sense of being invisible dissolved in the realization that she had never truly lost her place in the sky. She had just been waiting for the right moment for the world to remember. The passenger beside her dared to whisper again. "Wait, are you some kind of military pilot?" Emma's lips curved faintly. "You could say that," she murmured, returning her gaze to the clouds. She allowed herself a small, private satisfaction. The world on this plane had underestimated her, judged her by appearances and assumptions. But now, in the span of a few minutes, the invisible threads of her life as Valkyrie had stretched into reality. She was being recognized not by strangers, not by applause, but by the very machinery of the sky she had once mastered. The jets outside continued to flank their commercial plane, their engines roaring like distant thunder. Emma's mind ran through every procedure, every formation, every risk assessment she had learned in her career. She hadn't been in the cockpit for years, but muscle memory, instinct, and training never left. Every movement outside was deliberate, controlled, precise, a dance of discipline she had once led. Passengers were beginning to murmur more loudly, pointing to the jets, taking photos. The businessman's smugness had completely vanished, replaced by awe and fear. He leaned back in his seat, speechless. Emma allowed herself a brief glance around the cabin. For the first time, the stares directed at her weren't scornful. They were curious, respectful, uncertain. She felt the weight of that attention, but didn't waver. She didn't need to explain. Her presence, her acknowledgement, and the call sign were enough. She thought briefly of her squadron, her team, her mentors. All the training, all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights, they had led her here. The world may have forgotten the name Emma Carter, but Valkyrie was remembered. Always. The pilot's voice came once more, clipped and professional. "We are adjusting our course to maintain secure airspace. The escort will continue until further notice." All passengers remained seated. Emma exhaled slowly, letting the tension in her body ease slightly, though her mind remained alert. She had no idea why she had been summoned, why Air Force One had diverted in response to her presence, or what mission lay ahead. All she knew was that the humiliation in 22C had ended, replaced by recognition she had never asked for, but perhaps had always deserved. Outside, the sun glinted off the wings of the escort jets, painting them silver against the clouds. Emma stared at them for a long moment, the rhythm of her heartbeat syncing with the hum of the engines. This was her world, the one she had left behind, but never truly abandoned. And now, the world of ordinary passengers had caught a glimpse of it, as the plane leveled. Cutting through the cottony sky, Emma Carter felt the quiet thrill of destiny stirring in the air. The turbulence had passed, But the real journey was just beginning. The cabin had quieted to a tense, expectant hush. Even the businessman in 22B no longer tapped impatiently at his phone. He sat rigid, pale, whispering occasionally to himself. Outside, the escorting jets maintained their disciplined formation, perfectly flanking the commercial airliner like shadows in motion. Their synchronized movements spoke of precision, coordination, and unspoken authority. Emma Carter's instincts prickled. Every formation she had ever flown, every mission she had commanded, came rushing back in a wave of clarity. This was no ordinary escort. This was a recognition she had never expected. Her fingers flexed on the armrest as the static-laced intercom crackled again. This time, the message was unmistakable. Valkyrie, confirmed status. Request acknowledgement. Her heart leapt in rhythm with the words. Valkyrie, her call sign. A name once whispered in combat rooms, in briefings filled with generals, squadron leaders, and air traffic controllers who depended on her judgment to save lives. A name she had long buried beneath civilian anonymity, now spoken across the radio waves, recognized, respected, and urgent. Emma's gaze flicked to the cockpit, instinctively knowing that her acknowledgement was required not out of formality, but necessity. One call sign, one acknowledgement, and the course of this flight, and possibly more, would pivot entirely. On her response, she swallowed hard, letting the gravity of the moment settle. The businessman beside her finally managed to whisper, his voice trembling. Do you know what they're saying? Emma turned her gaze toward him briefly, her eyes steady and cold. Yes, she said softly, as if merely saying the word could anchor reality. She turned back toward the window, toward the sleek silhouettes of the F-16S, maintaining formation with deadly precision. Outside, the sunlight gleamed on their fuselages, casting bright reflections that danced across the clouds. The flight attendant, pale and shaking, leaned toward Emma again, voice hushed. Ma'am, they're waiting for you to respond. Emma nodded once, deliberately slow. Valkyrie acknowledges. The silence that followed seemed to ripple through the plane itself. Even the engines sounded different, as though the mechanical drone had become secondary to the gravity of recognition. Outside, one of the jets dipped its wings in a precise salute. Emma's chest tightened. She hadn't asked for acknowledgement, didn't crave applause, yet the weight of history and duty was undeniable. She had been invisible, mocked, dismissed. Now the skies themselves seemed to bow in recognition of her presence. The businessman swallowed audibly, his bravado gone. I think I underestimated you, he muttered, voice shaking. He was right. He couldn't understand the life she had led, the decisions she had made in seconds that had determined survival or death, lives saved or lost. No passenger in 22C could. Emma's mind, however, was already scanning the situation. The jets outside were not only escorting, they were controlling the airspace. Every angle, every distance, every approach vector was calculated. This wasn't about theatrics or protocol. It was about safety, precision, and urgency. She thought back to her first mission with that call sign. Flying into hostile territory under cover of night, radar compromised, sensors misfiring, she had led her squadron to intercept threats targeting a transport convoy. Her team's lives, along with hundreds of others, had depended on her judgment. One error, one hesitation, would have been catastrophic. The adrenaline, the clarity of mind, the pressure, it all came flooding back in this single moment, 30,000 feet above ordinary life. Emma's fingers unconsciously flexed, as if gripping a control stick, her body recalling the tension and posture of a pilot ready to react in milliseconds. The cockpit intercom crackled again. Maintain formation. Valkyrie confirmed. Await further instructions. Her pulse matched the rhythm of the escort. She had no idea what awaited, no idea why Air Force One had diverted in response to her presence. Yet instinct told her she was about to step into a mission again, one that required focus, authority, and precision. Around her, passengers whispered nervously, craning to see the escort outside. Children clutched parents' arms. Smartphones were raised. None could comprehend what they were witnessing. None knew the history behind the call sign that had just echoed through the cabin. Valkyrie was more than a name. It was a legacy, a code, a signal of deadly competence that few survived long enough to earn. The businessman beside her no longer smirked. His confidence had evaporated entirely. You were serious?" he murmured, barely audible. Emma finally turned toward him, letting her calm authority fill her voice. "I was never just a pilot," she said evenly. "I led missions that nobody else could. And if necessary, I still can." The man nodded, wordless, chastened. Emma's gaze returned to the window. The escorting jets shifted slightly, adjusting to maintain optimal protection. Their movement was graceful yet deadly, a silent demonstration of skill and coordination. She recognized every maneuver, every angle, every potential vulnerability. This was no ordinary flight. She felt the familiar thrill of responsibility, the rush that only comes when stakes are life or death, when every decision matters. Her attention was interrupted by the cabin intercom again. The pilot's voice, calm but with underlying tension, addressed all passengers. "We are proceeding through controlled airspace with an escort. All passengers should remain seated. No cause for alarm. This is a precautionary measure for safety." Most passengers nodded, some relaxed slightly, believing it was an abundance of caution. But Emma understood differently. The escort was precise. It was personal. Someone important was awaiting her acknowledgement, someone who knew her history, and needed her now. She thought again of her squadron, of the missions that had defined her. She had been Valkyrie in hostile skies, commanding respect through competence, precision, and courage. And now, the call sign had resurfaced, bridging the gap between the anonymous traveler in 22C and the woman who had once ruled the air. Her. Mind raced with possibilities. Why now? Why this flight? What could require Air Force One to adjust its route because of her presence? The answer was unknowable in this moment. Yet the certainty of necessity of urgency pressed down on her shoulders. This was her world. The skies, the strategy, the weight of life and death, it all mattered again, even if only for minutes. Emma straightened in her seat, every muscle engaged, every instinct alive. She was ready, not just to acknowledge, but to act if needed. Valkyrie had never been a bystander, and she wouldn't start now. Outside, one of the jets shifted its wingtip, sending a silent signal she instinctively recognized. Prepared, on standby, trust the pilot. Inside, 22C had become a nexus of silent awe. The businessman had stopped murmuring. The student's eyes were wide with curiosity. The flight attendant hovered, tense and uncertain. And Emma Carter sat poised, calm, invisible and visible at once, the world outside reflecting the quiet storm of recognition that had returned her to life she thought she had left behind. The clouds stretched endlessly, but Emma felt grounded, focused, and powerful. She was Valkyrie again. And somewhere ahead, the course of the plane, the escort, and everything that awaited was about to change because of her presence. Asterisk the roar of the escort jets outside filled the cabin with a vibrating hum, a sound that seemed to echo directly into the bones. Emma Carter's gaze remained fixed on the window, her body perfectly still, her instincts honed from years of combat missions, kicking in automatically. Every shift in the formation, every subtle tilt of the F-16S wings screamed coordination. This was no routine escort. The businessman beside her had long stopped speaking, his phone forgotten on his lap. His earlier arrogance had dissolved entirely, replaced by awe and a lingering tremor. I don't understand, he murmured, barely audible. Why are they? Emma didn't answer. She didn't need to. The answer was obvious to her. She was the reason. Her call, signed Valkyrie, had been broadcast over encrypted channels. Air Force One had diverted. Every jet, every maneuver, every calculated distance in the sky was a direct response to her presence. The flight attendant hovered nervously in the aisle. "Ma'am, the cockpit," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "They've requested you confirm your identity again." Emma inhaled slowly, feeling the familiar rhythm of control wash over her. One acknowledgement, one word, could stabilize an entire operation. She turned toward the attendant. "Tell them Valkyrie confirms," she said evenly, voice low but commanding. A hush fell over the cabin. Even the murmuring passengers quieted, sensing the weight of authority in those words. Outside, the jets shifted slightly, dipping there. Wings in a precise salute. Emma's chest tightened. Every maneuver, every formality, every subtle motion was a reminder. This was no ordinary flight. She felt the same thrill she had felt decades ago, flying through hostile airspace in the dead of night, her squadron relying on her precision and courage. Decisions she had once made in seconds, choices that determined life or death, now mirrored in the movements of the escort surrounding this civilian jet. Her mind raced. Air Force One was not just protecting the president. They were protecting her. Someone important had recognized her. Someone who trusted her judgment implicitly. But why now? Why here? The pilot's voice crackled again, steady, calm, but with a tension that betrayed urgency. "Passengers, we are proceeding under escort through controlled airspace. Remain seated, no cause for alarm." The cabin murmurs rose again. Some passengers craned their necks, trying to glimpse the jets outside. Smartphones were raised. The businessman beside Emma whispered, I think they're protecting you?" Emma's lips curved faintly. "They are," she said. "And it's not for show." Her thoughts drifted briefly to the missions she had led as Valkyrie. She remembered the night her squadron intercepted an enemy convoy targeting civilians. The precision, the split-second decisions, the coordination required, it had been exacting, terrifying, and necessary. Those memories came back vividly now. She could feel the surge of adrenaline, the clarity of purpose, the instinctive understanding of risk versus reward. She glanced out the window. One of the jets had adjusted its angle, maintaining a precise distance and altitude relative to their commercial plane. Another executed a subtle shift, ensuring the other side of the formation was equally protected. The choreography was perfect. The precision was lethal, and it was all in response to her. The flight attendant returned, whispering again, tense and uncertain. "Ma'am, the cockpit says they need to verify you're ready to act if necessary." Emma's pulse quickened. She wasn't just being recognized. She was being called back into action. Her mind ran through procedures instinctively. Formation flying, response patterns, evasive maneuvers, emergency protocols. Muscle memory surged. She was Valkyrie again. "Tell them," she said calmly, "I am ready." The attendant nodded, visibly relieved, and disappeared down the aisle. The businessman leaned closer, eyes wide. "Ready for what?" he whispered, panic rising in his voice. Emma didn't answer. Words would only weaken the moment. Outside, the jets held formation. Engines humming like predators, precise and deliberate. Every angle, every line, every maneuver was purposeful. This was no mere escort. It was a security operation. She could feel it in her bones. The intercom crackled again, transmitting words most passengers couldn't comprehend. To Emma, however, each syllable was sharp, clear, and loaded with meaning. Tactical instructions, confirmation codes, coordinates, all of it meant one thing. They were relying on her judgment. The name Valkyrie echoed in her mind like a drumbeat she hadn't felt in years. Her fingers flexed against the armrest as she thought about the gravity of the situation. Air Force One had adjusted its course because of her. This was unprecedented. She had flown for the Air Force for decades, but she had never imagined a moment like this being summoned mid-flight. In a civilian aircraft, under escort, her call sign recognized, her abilities demanded once more. She glanced at the businessman. "This isn't about you," she said quietly, almost to herself. "And it's not a stunt. It's serious." He nodded slowly, fear and awe written across his face. He had underestimated her. He had judged her based on appearances. And now, he was witnessing the truth of her life. Outside, the jets flanked the aircraft with ruthless precision. Emma observed every motion, the micro-adjustments, the aerodynamic shifts, the silent communication between pilots. Each movement conveyed expertise and discipline. Each maneuver told a story she alone could read fully. She allowed herself a brief memory of the squadron she had led. The weight of responsibility, the pressure to execute flawlessly, the knowledge that mistakes were lethal, it all came rushing back. This was no different, though the stakes were opaque. Someone on Air Force One had recognized her, trusted her, and required her acknowledgement to proceed. She straightened in her seat. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen. Her presence mattered. Her skills mattered. And the sky itself had answered her. The pilot's voice sounded again, calm and controlled. "We are adjusting formation slightly to maintain optimal security. Please remain seated. There is no cause for alarm." Emma exhaled slowly, allowing herself a moment of calm. But she knew instinctively that the real mission hadn't started yet. The escort's precision, the urgency in the communications, the deliberate attention, they were waiting for something, and she would need to respond. The cabin remained quiet, passengers whispering nervously, glancing at the window. Emma's eyes narrowed, reading the formation like a flight plan. The F-16s were deadly, beautiful in their precision. They moved with grace and lethal intent. They were protecting her. They were signaling their trust in her. And somewhere above the clouds, Air Force One waited, holding its course, adjusting its path for her. For the first time in hours, Emma allowed herself a small, private smile. Valkyrie wasn't forgotten. She wasn't invisible. The humiliation in 22C had ended, replaced by acknowledgement, respect, and the weight of a mission that could unfold at any second. Her mind sharpened. Eyes scanning, instincts alive, pulse steady. She was ready. The escort would not fail. And neither would she. Asterisk, the cabin of the commercial plane was tense, silent, except for the mechanical hum of the engines. Outside, the escorting F-16s maintained their disciplined positions, their movements so precise they seemed choreographed. Emma Carter sat in 22C, eyes fixed on the window, but her mind was fully alert, scanning, calculating, anticipating. This was no ordinary flight. Every motion outside reflected intention, purpose, and authority. The businessman in 22B had gone completely silent, his earlier arrogance replaced by awe and fear. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing nervously at the student across the aisle, then back to Emma. I think. You're serious," he whispered, voice trembling. Emma's gaze didn't leave the window. She didn't need to respond. One word from her earlier Valkyrie, acknowledges, had already communicated everything. Recognition, authority, readiness. The silent discipline radiating from the escorting jets was her answer. They trusted her. The flight attendant hovered. Again, her face pale, voice hesitant. "Ma'am, the cockpit," she whispered, leaning closer. "They're requesting confirmation that you're ready to act if necessary." Emma's pulse quickened slightly, but she remained calm. This was instinct, muscle memory, the training that had shaped her for decades. She didn't hesitate. "Tell them," she said evenly, voice low but firm. "I am ready." The attendant nodded and hurried down the aisle. The businessman's eyes widened. "Ready for what?" he murmured. Emma didn't answer. Words were unnecessary. Outside, the jets shifted subtly, each motion deliberate. She could read it clearly. The escort was preparing to enforce security. The commercial plane was under protective scrutiny. And she was central to the operation. Her mind raced, recalling past missions. In combat, every second counted. Decisions had to be perfect, consequences immediate. Muscle memory and instinct guided her hand faster than thought. She had led squadrons into hostile skies, navigated enemy fire, and executed maneuvers that saved hundreds of lives. This was different, but the principles were the same. Awareness, precision, control. She looked briefly at the passengers. None of them understood the gravity of what was happening. They saw a woman in a worn jacket, a call sign unknown, a plane flanked by fighter jets. But they couldn't comprehend that those jets were responding to her, that her acknowledgement had triggered protocols for Air Force One itself. The businessman whispered again, more shakily. I never would have guessed. You? Emma finally turned toward him, calm but unwavering. I was never just a pilot, she said evenly. I led missions that nobody else could. And, if necessary, I still can. He nodded mutely, eyes wide. There was nothing more to say. Outside, the escort tightened. The F-16s adjusted their positions with precision, creating a protective envelope around the commercial plane. One jet dipped its wings in a subtle signal of acknowledgement and respect. Emma's chest tightened. This wasn't about protocol or appearance. It was a demonstration of trust, skill, and deadly capability. The intercom crackled again. Emma recognized the coded transmission immediately, every word clear despite the static. Tactical instructions, confirmation codes, coordinates meant for her alone. They were counting on her judgment. Valkyrie. The name echoed in her mind like a drumbeat she hadn't heard in years. Asterisk, her fingers flexed against the armrest. Every motion outside, every communication through the static, every subtle shift in altitude or speed was a reminder. She was part of a larger operation, one that demanded readiness and action. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself. The escorting. Jets weren't just protecting the plane, they were protecting her. And somewhere on Air Force One, someone had recognized her, remembered her, and responded. The significance of that fact was almost overwhelming. Emma's thoughts drifted briefly to her squadron, her team, the missions that had defined her. Decisions that determined life or death, moments that required flawless precision. They had led her here. Valkyrie had never been a bystander, and she wouldn't start now. The pilot's voice returned over the intercom, calm but urgent. We are maintaining formation under escort. All passengers remain seated. No cause for alarm. Emma's eyes narrowed as she studied the formation. The F-16s were flawless, executing micro-adjustments that would have taken years of training to perfect. Every movement conveyed expertise and lethal intent. Every motion said one thing. We trust you. Her pulse quickened. The reality of being summoned mid-flight was unprecedented. Air Force One had diverted. Fighter jets were maneuvering to protect her. Her call sign had been recognized. And now, she was expected to act if necessary. She let her mind run through procedures instinctively. Evasive maneuvers, formation flight adjustments, communication protocols. Muscle memory surged. Valkyrie had returned, fully formed, ready to respond at a moment's notice. The cabin remained tense, whispers and murmurs spreading among passengers. But Emma didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Her calm authority dominated the moment. The businessman beside her had long ceased speaking, his fear and awe evident in every tremor of his hands. The flight attendant returned briefly, nodding to Emma. "They're ready," she said softly. "They'll follow your lead if needed." Emma exhaled slowly, letting the words sink in. She wasn't invisible anymore. She had been underestimated, dismissed, humiliated, but none of it mattered now. Recognition, respect, trust, these were things she had earned in the skies, and now they had returned to her in the form of Air Force One and its escort. Outside, the jets adjusted again, forming a tighter formation. Engines roared, a low vibration that reverberated through the cabin. Emma's mind sharpened, ready for whatever might come next. She could feel the thrill of anticipation, the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. The businessman whispered again, voice trembling. "So, you really are, Valkyrie?" Emma's lips curved faintly. "I am," she said quietly. "And I am ready." For the first time in hours, a sense of purpose replaced the humiliation, the whispers, the judgment she had endured. The world had recognized her. The sky had recognized her. And she was prepared to act, as she always had. The escort's precision, the pilot's calm, the coded transmissions, they all pointed to the same truth. Emma Carter was no longer a passenger. She was central to a mission, a person whose presence demanded attention and respect. Her mind ran through possibilities. Why now? What had triggered this? The answers were unknown, but instinct and training told her one thing. She was ready for whatever came. And somewhere above the clouds, the course of the flight and everything tied. To Air Force One was about to change because of her. Valkyrie was back. Asterisk, the cabin was electric with quiet tension. Every passenger had noticed the escort, yet none could understand its significance. Emma Carter, seated in 22C, was calm, her posture rigid, her mind sharp. The roar of the jets outside reverberated through the fuselage, a reminder of the extraordinary situation. She could read the movements like a living blueprint of strategy, a protective lattice of power and precision. The businessman in 22B shifted nervously, his hands fidgeting in his lap. He had gone from smug disdain to awe in a matter of hours. I don't understand," he murmured. Why are they for you?" Emma's eyes flicked briefly to him, unwavering. "Because," she said softly, "this isn't about me. It's about what I represent and what I can do." Outside, the jets maintained perfect formation, each micro-adjustment deliberate. Emma's instincts, honed over decades of flight operations, immediately recognized the subtle signals. Protective. Angles, threat assessment positioning, spacing calculated for rapid response. Every motion was a message to her alone. "We trust you. We are ready to act. We await your command." The intercom crackled again. This time, the transmission was clearer. The words sharp, precise, encoded. Emma caught every syllable. Tactical information. Flight paths. Response protocols. Coordinates. And at the end, one unmistakable phrase. Valkyrie, proceed as directed. Air Force One confirms priority escort. All measures in effect. You are the authority. Her chest tightened, adrenaline surging. Every passenger in the cabin had no idea what that meant. But to Emma, it was clear. This was no simple escort. Air Force One had altered its course specifically because of her. She wasn't just recognized, she was indispensable. The flight attendant approached once more, whispering, "Mom, the cockpit is waiting." They need confirmation, you understand, and are ready. Emma exhaled slowly, letting the weight settle over her shoulders. This was the moment she had trained for, the moment her instincts would guide her. She turned her gaze outward, toward the escort, toward the sky that had always been hers. "Tell them," she said evenly, voice calm and commanding. "Valkyrie is ready and authorized to act." The attendant nodded, pale but relieved, and hurried back toward the cockpit. The businessman leaned closer, whispering, trembling. "Authorized? To act? You could do what?" Emma smiled faintly, though her eyes never left the window. "Whatever is necessary," she said. Her mind replayed every mission she had led as Valkyrie. The missions that had earned her call sign, missions that had saved countless lives in hostile airspace. Precision, judgment, courage under fire, these were not just memories. They were skills, instincts that never left her. She had been summoned again, and the sky had answered her. The escort tightened its formation, one jet dipping slightly to signal acknowledgement. The hum of the engines deepened. Emma could feel the vibration through her body, almost like a heartbeat syncing with her own. This was more than an operation. It was a recognition of her authority, her experience, and her presence. She glanced at the passengers around her. Fear, awe, curiosity, they were all reflected in their faces. The businessman had gone completely silent, pale and shaken, finally understanding that appearances could be deceiving. The college student stared wide-eyed at Emma, earbuds abandoned, trying to comprehend what she was witnessing. Emma's attention returned to the sky. One of the F-16s moved closer, its movements subtle yet deliberate. Another shifted slightly, covering a blind spot. Every motion was a reminder. They were waiting for her. The responsibility was hers now. She felt a quiet thrill, the same exhilaration she had felt decades ago, flying through hostile skies, commanding a squadron under impossible conditions. Only now, the threat was undefined. She didn't know who or what prompted Air Force One's diversion. She didn't know what awaited her, but she knew this. She was ready. The intercom crackled once more, voice clipped, professional, urgent. "Valkyrie, Air Force One requests coordination. Your acknowledgement is confirmed. Maintain formation. Further instructions pending. All personnel comply." Emma exhaled slowly, letting the significance of the moment sink in. This was unprecedented. The highest office in the country, the aircraft that carried the president, had adjusted its flight path specifically in response to her presence. And now, she was in command of her own destiny, in the way that only Valkyrie could be. The businessman whispered again, nearly inaudible. I've never seen anything like this." Emma gave him a faint, knowing look. "You're seeing what it means to earn trust through action, not words." Outside, the escort moved in tighter. The engines of the jets throbbed like living creatures, their shadows stretching across the clouds. Emma traced their patterns, noting every adjustment, every angle, every signal. She was reading a language of authority, one that only someone who had lived in the sky could comprehend. Her body responded instinctively. Shoulders squared, spine straightened, hands flexed lightly against the armrests. Valkyrie was awake again, alert, ready. The flight attendant returned one final time, whispering, "They're ready to follow your lead." Emma nodded. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was the center of a high-stakes operation, a key figure in a mission she had not asked for, but was prepared to undertake. She thought briefly of her squadron, of the missions where lives had depended on her judgment and precision. She felt the weight of responsibility settle over her. She had been summoned again, not because anyone doubted her skill, but because they trusted it implicitly. Outside, the F-16s held formation, their engines humming with lethal grace. Emma could feel the rhythm, the discipline, the authority. They. Message was clear. The Sky and Air Force One were aligned with her dot. Her pulse steadied. Valkyrie had returned, fully aware, fully capable. The humiliation of 2-2C, the whispers, the judgment, all dissolved in the clarity of recognition and purpose. She was ready to act if needed. The businessman dared to whisper one last time. I think I understand now. You're not just a pilot. You're Valkyrie. Emma's lips curved faintly, a quiet acknowledgement. She didn't need to say more. The escort outside, the cockpit, the intercom, all had said it already. And somewhere above the clouds, Air Force One waited, holding its course, relying on her. The sky was hers again, and the mission was about to begin. The hum of the engines was deafening now, vibrating through the cabin like a living pulse. Emma Carter's eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanned the escorting jets outside. The F-16s flanked the plane with lethal precision, their formation a protective cage around the civilian aircraft. Every micro-adjustment, every tilt of a wing, every subtle change in altitude was a silent message. The sky had been claimed, and she, Valkyrie, was at its center. The businessman in 22B sat frozen. His earlier arrogance vanished entirely. He whispered to no one in particular, voice trembling. I never imagined. Emma's gaze flicked toward him, her expression calm but unreadable. It's okay, she said quietly. You're seeing something most will never witness. The flight attendant hovered again, pale and uncertain. Ma'am, the cockpit. They're requesting final confirmation before proceeding into secure airspace. Emma inhaled deeply, muscles tightening in anticipation. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was the linchpin of an operation that involved the president's plane, a squadron of escort jets, and lives she could only assume hung in the eye. Balance, years of instinct, discipline, and precision flooded back. She was ready. Tell them, she said evenly, voice calm and commanding. Valkyrie is in control and ready to execute. The attendant nodded and disappeared toward the cockpit. Emma returned her gaze to the window. The sky was a vast canvas of clouds, sunlight reflecting off the wings of the F-16S. The formation moved with rhythmic precision, each jet's movement deliberate, deadly, yet graceful. The intercom crackled once more, carrying a voice sharp, controlled and urgent. Valkyrie, Air Force One confirms priority escort. Maintain current formation. All personnel comply with your lead. You are authorized. Her chest tightened. This was unprecedented. The president's aircraft had diverted. Air Force One itself was responding to her call sign, adjusting course and trusting her judgment. Valkyrie was no longer a memory. She was an active force, central to a mission that none of the passengers could comprehend. Her mind raced through possibilities. Why had she been summoned? What threat had prompted this extraordinary measure? The answers were unknown, but instinct and training told her one thing. She was the one in command now. Outside, one of the escort jets dipped its wings in a subtle salute, a signal she instinctively understood. Another adjusted its position, closing a protective gap. Every movement, every adjustment, every silent communication screamed readiness. The escort was poised, waiting for her to direct, to respond, to lead. Emma's pulse steadied. She recalled every mission she had led as Valkyrie, flying into hostile skies, intercepting threats, leading squads under impossible conditions. Each decision could mean life or death. Each maneuver required absolute precision. Now the stakes were undefined, but no less serious. The businessman whispered again, nearly inaudible. So, you really could do anything? Emma's lips curved faintly. Only what's necessary, she replied. Her eyes remained fixed on the Escort. The sky, once ordinary, had become a theater of calculated movement. Every motion outside was a reflection of her past, present, and capability. The intercom crackled, and the pilot's voice addressed all passengers. We are proceeding into secure airspace under priority escort. All passengers remain seated. No cause for alarm. Follow instructions of crew members. Most passengers murmured nervously, craning to see the jets outside. The reality of the situation was incomprehensible to them. They saw the spectacle, but didn't understand its magnitude. Only Emma understood the choreography, the lethal precision, the unspoken trust. Her fingers flexed against the armrest, her body recalling the tension and posture of a pilot ready for rapid maneuvers. Valkyrie was awake, fully present, fully aware. The humiliation of 22C, the sneers, the whispers, none of it mattered anymore. Recognition, respect, and authority had returned. The Escort shifted slightly, adjusting for a subtle tactical advantage. Emma noted every angle, every potential vulnerability, every microsecond of movement. She could feel the rhythm, the coordination, the lethal grace of her allies in the sky. They were aligned with her instincts, her experience, her judgment. The businessman finally leaned forward, whispering, I can't believe what I'm seeing. You're not just a pilot. You're Valkyrie. Emma allowed herself a small, private smile. I am, she said softly, and I am ready. The cabin fell into a quiet awe. Passengers stared at the window, at the jets outside, sensing tension, authority, and power they could not fully comprehend. The reality of the moment was almost overwhelming. Valkyrie was here. Valkyrie was acknowledged. And Valkyrie was trusted. Outside, Air Force One adjusted its flight path, maintaining proximity without revealing its presence to other aircraft. Every motion, every subtle correction, was made in response to her acknowledgement. Valkyrie's call sign had become the axis upon which this extraordinary operation turned. Emma's mind sharpened. She thought briefly of her squadron, of the missions where precision had meant life or death. Muscle memory, instinct, and training surged. This was no different, though the scale was unprecedented. She was being trusted to ensure the security of Air Force One itself. The intercom crackled again, the pilot's voice clear and professional. Valkyrie, maintain formation. Escort protocols active. Await further instructions from secure channels. Emma's pulse matched the rhythm of the engines. Outside, the escort jets moved as one, responding instantly to subtle signals. Every motion was deliberate, lethal, and perfectly synchronized. The sky was alive with discipline and authority. She allowed herself a brief thought of her humiliation earlier. The whispers, the judgment, the sneers, they were gone, replaced by recognition, respect, and responsibility. Valkyrie had returned, commanding not just the sky, but the trust of the most powerful aircraft in the world. The businessman beside her whispered, voice trembling, I don't think I'll ever look at anyone the same way again. Emma's eyes flicked toward him, calm and resolute. You're seeing what it means to earn trust through skill, precision, and experience. The jets outside adjusted formation again. Emma could read the subtle signals, cover angles, threat vectors, positioning for maximum protection. The choreography was flawless, lethal, and responsive to her presence. Valkyrie was at the center. The flight attendant whispered one final time. They're ready to follow your lead. Emma nodded. Her mind ran through contingencies, procedures, and emergency protocols. She was not just a passenger. She was central to a high-stakes mission. Valkyrie was awake, aware, and ready. Outside, the F-16S held formation like guardians, engines vibrating through the clouds. Air Force One maintained course, silent and powerful, responsive to her acknowledgement. Emma felt the surge of authority and purpose. This was her world. The sky, the mission, the trust, it all belonged to Valkyrie. She exhaled slowly, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. Recognition had replaced humiliation. Authority had replaced doubt, and the sky, vast and infinite, had welcomed her back. Valkyrie was no longer invisible. She was seen, she was trusted, she was ready. And somewhere above the clouds, Air Force One and its escort moved in perfect synchrony, aligned with her presence, awaiting her command. The mission, whatever it was, had begun.